So hello, this is Professor Sander again, and what we're going to do today is go into the deep dive of the beneficiaries and the beneficiary discovery process. This really plays off of the last couple of discussions we've had on the mission model canvas and the value proposition canvas. And now what we're going to do is go into each of the individual blocks. So let's take a step back for a moment and explore that. So we've had a chance to look at the mission model canvas from an overarching perspective, right? And so now starting with this video lecture, what we're going to do is look at the specific blocks individually, and hopefully I can give you some guidance on how to look at these blocks, and it'll help you certainly in your beneficiary discovery process, which you'll do through the rest of this semester. Beneficiaries are kind of the essential element to the equation because they connect you to the actual problem in a very, very real way. Okay. So, misunderstanding the beneficiary discovery process or who beneficiaries are can be really a tremendous time sink, a waste of time. So who is a beneficiary? So first of all, understand beneficiaries are not organizations, okay? Beneficiaries have names, they are people, they have names, they have positions, they might represent an organization, but there's somebody that you can identify that has the specific problem. You'll hear about primary, secondary, and tertiary beneficiaries. So the primary beneficiary is the one that really has the problem that's been put in front of you, and that you'll attack throughout this program. And so that's the first thing to remember. It's a person that you can identify, because at the end of the day, to say, well, we talked to the DoD or the Army or whatever, is really not helpful to this process. Okay. And so you're going to have initial interviews, and you have some initial contacts, and then you use those to get follow-on interviews. You'll use some of your own research on the topic areas to get follow-on interviews as well. And so as you go through this, just understand that specificity in your discussion with your beneficiaries is going to be your biggest ally. Okay. And so the more quickly you get down to specificity of these are, the people, specific people that are being affected by this, if it's, reconnaissance, Marines, what does that mean in terms of specific warfighter allocations, those types of things. So really not understanding that a beneficiary is a person is probably the most common mistake. The second, maybe most common mistake is interviewing too few beneficiaries. And so it's easy to say, well, look, I've talked to one sergeant in the Army on this topic, or maybe two in the same unit. And the challenge with that is many times you get that particular person's view of the problem and the potential solution sets and who are affected and so on and so on. But there's a balancing act between, you can't obviously talk to 20 or 30, but is one person really kind of defining the archetype of that individual and the group that they're representing. Okay. So it's a balancing act between talking to too few and talking to too many. If you talk to two or three Army sergeants in a unit, then maybe you get the feel for that rank level in that unit and how the problem affects them or how they see the problem. If you talk to obviously 15 or 20 across multiple units that are involved in the problem in some way, you're going to get a broader perspective. But on the other hand, there's a limited time. So this really is kind of a balancing act. All right, let's talk about, and we'll try and do this in each one of these lectures. Let's talk about a success story. So this success story focuses on a team of Hacking for Defense students that was at the University of Virginia in the fall of 2020. And they were presented with a problem statement that was essentially remote piloted aircraft, which is RPA, so remote piloted aircraft. You could think of them in the broadest sense as drones, that the Air Force was using the RPA personnel, the pilots. And remember, these are remote piloted, so these pilots are sitting in a control room, typically distant from the actual contested field of action. And they needed, the Air Force really needed effective policy implementation strategies and specific changes to the Air Force policies to really prioritize these pilots and specifically their mental health, what's called human capital, and also improve mission readiness and retention rates in the RPA pilot community. And I'll explain that here in a second. So in the Air Force, between 2013 and 2020, when this team attacked this problem, there was a demand growth of 76% for remotely piloted aircraft pilots. So demand was very, very high for remotely RPA pilots. And at the same time, in the same time frame between 2013 and 2020, the retention rate, the annual retention rate for these same pilots was below 10%. So massively growing demand for the remote piloted aircraft pilots. And at the same time, 90% of them were leaving within a year. And as the team looked into this further, what they found is that these pilots, these RPA pilots, were struggling with burnout, anxiety, work-life balance challenges, and significantly higher rates of suicide ideation as compared to the rest of the U.S. Air Force. And so this team from University of Virginia, this Hacking for Defense team, focused on the challenges of implementing initiatives that were launched initially by the Air Force in early 2020, but taking those and recommending specific concrete policies that can be quickly enacted and concretely enacted that improve the life for RPA pilots. They spoke with 76 subject matter experts, and this obviously included the pilots, but it also included psychologists, psychiatrists, chaplains, major study authors. And through these interviews, the team very quickly identified low morale drivers. And there were some specifics, recruitment challenges. So this was an area, while it was growing, by 76% during this time frame in terms of demand for pilots for let's just call them drones for now. There were significant recruitment challenges because, again, the retention rate was only 10%, and so people understood it was a difficult field to get into. The promotion pathways are low. And there is this concept of moral injury that we're weighing on the pilots. And that's the concept that sometimes when you witness or see action that goes against your personal moral compass, it does injury to you. And essentially, it's almost like PTSD. And so a lot of these pilots are feeling ethically conflicted about their role. And remember, their role is they were not physically in the field of battle or the field of conflict. They were piloting drones through this field, and in some cases taking action at a distance, essentially on their monitor system, that would then cause physical action and sometimes death and injury on the field. So the issue previously to the students looking at this was really viewed as kind of this large and nebulous issue. But it wasn't. It was calling out for discrete policy problems. Again, that's what the team decided to focus on was small, concrete changes that can be quickly enacted and improve the quality of life for these pilots. So as an example, the team came out and they provided some specific policy recommendations, clear and distinct promotion pathways for RPA pilots, giving these pilots true days off rather than on-call days. There's a big difference, right? When you have a true day off, you're not going to get called into the office, and it's a different level of kind of the ability to relax versus thinking there's always a chance of whatever activity you're in with family or otherwise, you may be called in because, again, there's a mission that the Air Force needs to accomplish, and with the limited number of these RPA pilots. And so, and also, let me say one other thing: increasing social support through chaplains. So this is again part of the team's recommendations. There was a clear understanding and evidence that there was a requirement for increasing social support not only through psychiatrists but chaplains and more childcare options. Just the everyday requirements of the warfighters in their regular lives. And so they were able to then recommend these, and they're following up with this. So after the semester ended, the team started working with the National Security Policy Center at the University of Virginia's Batten School of Public Policy. They hosted a symposium for the RPA community, presented their findings, and are looking for how they can move it forward. So great success story that really was a result of significant beneficiary discovery, not only in terms of the pilots themselves, but again, psychologists, psychiatrists, chaplains, major study authors. Okay, so let's talk about kind of how do you do this, right? You start with the problem sponsor and statement, and understand that this is somebody else's problem. So what I mean by that is that you need to try and step back and not examine the issue from your own point of view, right? We all have our own points of views and experiences. And so we have a tendency to bring that bias into our assessment and examination of a problem that somebody brings to us. So take a step back, try and kind of put your biases, your thoughts aside, and be very open to understanding, to really kind of having open-ended but focused questions that helps you to understand the problem from first the problem sponsor's perspective, and then you'll do the same thing with other beneficiaries. Who is the sponsor? What do they do? How is this problem specifically impacting them? And then you can again extend that to other beneficiaries that you'll speak with. Okay, but it is important to understand, we've talked about this before, that the sponsor's definition is not disputable or static. So I can tell you from my involvement in the program to date, what I find is that in the majority of cases, the sponsor's problem definition changes, and sometimes significantly, throughout the semester, because they're taking a very complex problem, maybe boiling it down, and you're going to get many more inputs from other beneficiaries as to how they see the problem as stated. And so it's going to continuously evolve through the course. Different beneficiaries are going to have different views of the problem. And you'll find that as you go through and go through not only your chain of command, but then others that are affected by this. And frankly, sometimes solutions you might provide may cause more problem for other beneficiaries as part of the problem. And so there is this thing called the innovation paradigm, which is somewhat prevalent in engineering, which is let's go solve the problem and deploy at speed. And sometimes that leads you to, okay, the first solution, maybe many times technology or engineering centric, is the solution chosen to solve the problem. And that may be the best solution, but it probably is just one potential solution, right? And it may only be one potential piece of the solution. So as an example, there may be a better solution set that involves a combination of technology introduction to the problem, along with policy changes. And so in the example that I just gave you, it really ended up being more about policy than technology. Okay, let's talk about understanding the beneficiaries. Okay, again, just to reiterate, they have a title, they have a name, and so on. And so as you go through this process, remember what you're doing is in every single beneficiary discovery interview that you have, you're bringing a hypothesis in, and you're testing that hypothesis. So you build hypotheses as you go through in terms of who are the beneficiaries, what is the real problem, what is the value proposition, what are the deployment mechanisms, and so on and so on. And your challenge is to have a very focused discussion where you're either validating that hypothesis or invalidating or partially validating that hypothesis. Okay, so this again goes to kind of the scientific method of create a hypothesis, design an experiment, which is the interview, carry out the experiment, which is the interview, adjust, and then maybe as you get closer to potential solution sets, we'll bring in the concept of the MVP, or the minimum viable product. It really does start with this pyramid that you see to the right. You'll start looking at organizations and who are the different organizations involved in some way in the challenge that they're having. What are the job functions? Understanding every day. Day to day in the life of the people that are facing these problems from multiple perspectives. And then do those people, when you interview them, and if you've had sufficient interviews, do you really understand the archetypes? So do they represent kind of the common person of their title, of their position, that are facing these problems, and how do people look at these problems? So let's take this in a couple of steps. Okay, you now got some introduction to kind of the specifics of beneficiaries and and so on. But let's look at then this in a several step process. Okay. So the first step is really understanding what your audience wants. Okay. So, and this goes back to the value proposition canvas. What's the most significant pain that they're facing for each beneficiary? And again, you'll have multiple beneficiaries, those that are at kind of the tip of the spear, that maybe are out in the contested environment in the battlefield, that are facing the problem from a very, very real and physical perspective, to those that are in their chain of command, maybe the intelligence chain of command, and so on. And they all represent different beneficiaries. So what's the most significant pain, and what could be their biggest gain from this? Okay. And then that's how you're going to start to build on this beneficiary discovery process. You start with each of those with, what's your hypothesis? What is it that you hypothesize the problem, the need are? And then you're going to go through this interview, which will be hopefully close to half an hour, very directed, agenda driven, to really research your beneficiaries and try to understand what it is that you want to ask them. So this is all your research phase before you actually have that interview, and then you kind of go to step two. Step two is really, okay, I'm going to start to generate targets. And remember, the targets may be those that are suggested by other beneficiary interviews you do. They may be those that are very familiar with the problem space, but not necessarily with the specific problem that was presented to you. So there may be authors of relevant studies. There may be faculty that understand this field and the potential solution sets to some degree. I would suggest that those types of beneficiaries are probably going to be a big part of your beneficiary discovery, maybe in the second half of the semester, because in the first half of the semester you really need to focus on understanding the specific problem. And so you're going to develop a plan for discovery, and this will be an evolving plan. And it'll be frantic at times, right? Because you're going to be changing hypotheses. You're going to be learning about new beneficiaries, trying to schedule calls with them, or maybe meetings if they're proximate to where you are. But it's all about validating and invalidating the hypothesis. Okay. And then it's really the first pass of trying to understand what to ask. Because again, you're going to go into each one of these beneficiary discovery exercises, these interviews, with an agenda. Because if not, you will have wasted your time and you will have wasted their time, right? So it's really understand, okay, what hypothesis am I testing? What's the problem? Who else has the problem, if anybody? And right now, it's almost a given that the problem isn't solved because the problem was presented to you. But maybe you have a different solution set of view of the problem. Is it urgent? Needs to be solved now? I mean, many of these, lives depend on these things, and mission success depends on these things. But somehow they're being solved right now. And so you need to understand that, right? What's the closest solution? Maybe it's standard operating procedure right now. This is very similar to trying to understand how to solve problems in the entrepreneurial world, where there is a solution, typically, because the problem is somehow being solved, and usually it's what we call standard operating procedure. So this really kind of guides you on parsing the problem out and trying to understand this from multiple perspectives. Okay, what to ask? Okay, these are some bullets that are suggestions, but you'll have to frame your own kind of script for how you want each beneficiary interview to lay out, based on what it is, the information that you need, again, to either validate, invalidate, or partially validate your hypothesis. But you could certainly early on, especially start up with this. How do you solve the problem today? How do you see the problem being solved by others today? Is it a partial problem? Is it a complete problem? How painful is the current situation? And who's trying to solve it? And if you think about kind of what do you envision the solution to look like as you get into your minimum viable products? You'll certainly have more opportunities to demonstrate what you think your solution sets might be. So what you'd be asking of the beneficiaries at that point is essentially the reaction to the MVP that you put in front of them. But early on, when you don't have an MVP, it will almost certainly be more about, okay, what's your vision of a solution? And I would suspect you'll get you'll get answers right off the bat. I doubt if many people will say, well, I really don't know, because most people, if they've really experienced this problem, especially if they are primary beneficiaries that have really experienced it, and it has caused a significant level of pain or lack of gain to them, then they probably at some point, started to think about what solutions might look like. And certainly, then hopefully they'll share with you why those solutions might not have been enacted. All right, so what are the things that you want to ask? There's certain, again, it's a dynamic process, so you will have to decide what questions you want to specifically probe within a specified time frame to give you the best answer you can, which is really, again, about, validating or invalidating or partially validating the hypothesis. But here's a list you might want to, think about. Okay, why hasn't it been done? I mean, if it's such a big pain, then why has it not been done to date? And maybe it's almost certainly, the bigger the pain, probably the more difficult the problem, because big problems that are easily solved are typically solved. Small problems that is difficult to solve are almost certainly not solved. And then there's everything in between, which is the bigger the problem, the bigger the pain. Typically, if as solution sets get more complex, maybe costly, difficult, what you find is that many of these haven't been solved. Okay, so why hasn't it been done? If somebody tried, something to solve this, what's failed, right? You'll know what succeeded because that will have solved the problem. But you can't make the assumption that nobody's tried different solutions to this. And if so, you want to know that so that you have that as you think about that and kind of molding your own solution set. And then who tried it? What's changed since that time? And maybe I've seen many situations in the entrepreneurial world where people have tried solutions 6 years ago. And by the way, technology has changed in the last 6 years. The situation on the ground maybe has changed in the last 6 years. So it may be that solution sets that have previously been proposed or tried, while not valid at that point, may certainly be valid today. The environment, the technology, funding, those types of things. But really should finish with these kind of last three questions. Who else should I talk to? So this will help you broaden your net on beneficiary discovery. Secondly, can you introduce me? Just ask them to send a very quick introduction. You might even send your beneficiary, if you say, who else can I talk to? And they suggest a couple of names. What I might suggest to you is send them a very quick and clean email that has the fundamentals of what you're trying to do that they can forward to this other person. So what you're asking them to do is simply forward an email that you've already authored for them that describes why you want to talk to whoever they're going to recommend. It takes burden off of them, and it allows them to react much more quickly, because if they're comfortable with what you've put in the email, if they're not comfortable, they'll change it. If they're comfortable with what you've put in the email, they might just be able to hit the forward button right there, and you cut days off maybe from the email going out to whoever else might be, the next one that you could interview. And then finally, okay, what did I ask you? What should I? And by the way, be prepared. This is difficult because if you ask her with 30 seconds left in your time, they may come back and say, we should have asked A, B, C, D, and E. And you don't have time at that point to really delve into that. Okay, so last slide. So you think more broadly then kind of about, beneficiary discovery, the organization of all the beneficiary discovery you're going to do as you go through weeks. Essentially, for yourself, you're trying to answer 4 basic questions, okay? Which is, okay, what, your hypothesis, what is it? What's the hypothesis that you're testing, right? You've gone through a number of experiments. Experiments, again, can be beneficiary discovery interviews. It could be MVPs, right? Have you tested these hypotheses? Because your hypothesis has almost certainly changed, maybe not, but have you tested it? And what did you learn from that? And then finally, what are you going to do next? So this is key to, kind of the entire beneficiary discovery process, because it'll be kind of the cadence that you follow as you go week to week to week. And you'll use this process to essentially then come down to confirmed hypotheses that will then inform the solution set. So I hope this was helpful to you. This beneficiary discovery process is probably the thing that you will, well, almost certainly what you will do the most in this semester. And so, understanding this at some level of specificity, I'm happy to give that to you. But then again, you have to design your own beneficiary discovery based on what's going to help you in your specific situation as you go through different beneficiaries and different interviews during the semester. Thanks.